What is the software development lifecycle?
The software development lifecycle is a model. It talks about the what you need to do to develop software. Um, and it's a model for performing software development in a formal, organized way that you've heard the expression "pix or it didn't happen." The software development lifecycle provides us with artifacts that proves we did the process and we did it right. And artifacts or it didn't happen. So it gives a framework. Some people consider it kind of a cage that constrains them in their development, but it can also be thought of as a framework on which to build. And DornerWorks has a product development model or project development model that wraps itself around the software development lifecycle. The things provided by the software development lifecycle are a requirements analysis step, risk analysis and risk management, planning. Then there's an architecture that's produced. There's a software design that's produced. And all of that happens before there's any code. Then software development begins, building on that framework. Test case development begins. Tests are written to test the requirements are satisfied by the software. Not to test the software, but to test that the software satisfies the requirements. The tests are executed to verify that the software is implementing the requirements. And then validation is different than verification. Verification tests, did we build the thing right? Do we meet the requirements? Validation is the step that says, did we build the right thing? And that looks at the software and says, is the software satisfying the customer's needs? After all of that, delivery of the software occurs, and then the customer has the software in hand. And all of this cycles back to another requirements analysis phase to begin the next release of the software. So it's a circle of life for software development.
How do DornerWorks engineers implement the software development lifecycle?
DornerWorks engineers implement this process in various ways depending on the type of software we're developing. For commercial applications, we have the DornerWorks software development lifecycle. And that is a basic, walks through those phases. We do requirements analysis so that we know what we're building. We do a design and an architecture so that we know how the software is going to implement those requirements and satisfy them. We do a planning phase so that we know what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what compilers are we going to use, and what standards are we going to measure it against, coding standards, static analysis standards. Is it going to be MISRA C or is it going to be something else? That all happens, the planning stages of it occur during our elaboration phase of a project. Once we have the requirements analyzed and we've studied the risk, then we begin our construction phase. And the construction phase is when we do the actual implementation. We'll do the heavy lifting on the design and break it down into low-level software design. We'll begin coding and writing tests and building the software. At the same time, generally, we're doing things in parallel there so that we're testing the software as it goes, so that we don't have one big push at the end and then discover a whole bunch of problems. Testing happens and verification happens along the way. And that's our elaboration phase, or our construction phase. Then we do our transition, in which we verify the software and do acceptance testing on it for the customer so that the customer agrees, yes, you built what I was asking for. And then we deliver to the customer in the transition phase. In our medical solutions group, we go through a little bit different process because we have standards that define a little more rigor. And that's based on the safety classification of the software.
How do safety classifications change how products are developed?
Safety classifications, in the case of Medical Solutions Group, we look to the standard IEC 62304, and that defines 3 classifications of safety, depending on how much harm can come to the customer as a result of the software failing. A Class A application isn't going to cause any harm. It doesn't have any ramifications. If the software fails, the patient is not going to experience any difficulty or harm. The operator is not going to experience harm. Class B software, there may be minimal harm. It may cause injury, but not death. And Class C software is software where if the software were to fail, a death could occur. Each of these classifications drive more rigor in the software development process. So for Class A software, we would only have to develop a minimal set of requirements, a software design. We would do testing. But the amount of rigor that is required for a Class A product is really quite minimal and closer to what we would do for a commercial project for DornerWorks. Once you get into Class B software where some injury could occur, we're doing heavier risk analysis, and that is going to drive safety requirements in the software. We may allocate some of those safety requirements to hardware so that the hardware prevents the software from being able to fail. Or we may allocate it to mechanical design so that the mechanical design, the enclosure of the product, prevents the software failure that could happen from being a harm to the patient. The design gets into greater detail on a higher level classification, safety classification. The testing is done to a much lower level, and all of that traces back to the requirements in the trace matrix so that we can verify that every requirement was satisfied by the code and by the test that verified those requirements. All of this bundles together the requirements, the risk analysis, the software design, the code, the test cases and test results all get bundled together into a software design file that is delivered with the product. And that software design file then defines the artifacts that are analyzed by the FDA to verify that the software is in fact compliant with its design internally and with FDA rules.
How does the software development lifecycle lead to better products?
Human nature tends to look for the easy way to do things. And if we did that in software, you end up with a wild west of software development where we'll do the minimum that we need to do in order to deliver the product, but we can't necessarily prove that it was designed in a quality manner. So the software development lifecycle ensures that we follow best practices, and there are reviews in place to make sure that we are following those best practices. It ensures that we looked for the risks and we found ways to mitigate those risks to ensure that we're developing a product that is safe for the consumer, that is safe for the operator, and is reliable and works and effective. The FDA is concerned with safety and effectiveness. Is it safe for the patient? And does it do what it's supposed to do? Is it effective? And that's what they're looking for. The SDLC provides a body of artifacts in the design history file that proves we did all of the rigor that we were required to do and that we looked back at ourselves. We made sure that we were doing it along the way and that we followed that process. That produces quality software, safe software, and effective software.